or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Erin, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 8th, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. First article is Colleges Respond to Upswing in Disability Diagnoses. The number of college students reporting disabilities rose more than 50% over the last decade across a wide swath of schools, including at some of the most selective universities in the nation, according to a New York Times analysis of government data. The rise, which has corresponded with an increase in ADHD, autism, and other diagnoses, has also meant an increase in the number of students requiring accommodations, such as more time to take tests. While some colleges and students have embraced the trend, saying it shows schools are opening their doors to students who might previously have been shut out, it has raised worries that some could be gaming the system. The increases have occurred at all kinds of institutions, from small liberal arts colleges to large research universities commanding global reputations. At some colleges, over a third of students have registered physical or mental disabilities, signed off on by doctors. For those students, the schools generally provide the students legally required accommodations that others may not receive, such as special testing rooms and note-taking services. The proliferation and accommodation plans, known as 504 plans, after a section of federal law that prohibits discrimination based on disability, has made even the most academically rigorous universities more welcoming to students with disabilities. Among the top 100 schools that saw the biggest increase in students with disabilities are several in the group known as Ivy Plus, some of the most difficult schools in the nation for the students to get into. Including Harvard, Cornell, and the University of Chicago. At all three of these schools, 21% of students registered as having disabilities in 2024. According to government data, Harvard and the University of Chicago reported less than 3% in 2015. The data show. Cornell University increased from 6%. What is causing the increase? Not entirely clear, but experts named a number of factors, including a rise in ADHD and autism diagnoses, as well as an uptick in diagnoses and severe anxiety, particularly since the COVID pandemic. Students and their families are also getting better at understanding the law and pursuing accommodations, many starting when students are in grade school. The stigma around mental illness, which might have discouraged a student in the past from registering a disability, has fallen. The rising numbers have concerned some. Graham Hillard, who had written an issue for James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, a conservative policy group, said the current incentive structure to secure accommodations has led to more diagnoses. Is this fair, he said? Obviously not, but it will presumably sort itself out when kids who've never worked under a deadline or concentrated in a busy room attempt to join or stay in the workforce. Most of the top 100 schools showing the biggest increases over the past decade are not the country's most famous, selective, or exclusive universities. Among the top 10, Pace University in New York reported that 37% of students had a registered disability in 2024. In 2015, the school reported 5%. Hampshire College, a liberal arts school in Massachusetts, reported its percentage climbed to 38% from 10% in a decade. Scripps College, a women's liberal arts school in Claremont, California, saw increases from 11% to 36%. Many of the college students arrive on campus after having a 504 designation in their high school years. Data shows these accommodations are offered more liberally in affluent areas. College administrators and many students say the trend is a sign of progress. Officials at Pace, for example, said they were proud of the school's reputation as disability-friendly. We understood that students were coming from the K to 12 system where you have to fight for accommodations, said Elise Gerberth, Director of Student Accessibility Services for PACE. We wanted to change that experience for the students. Yes, you have to go through the correct protocols of providing documentation and meeting with us, but the whole goal is how can we provide the service? I think a lot of universities have started to look at that model as well, she added, which is why we partly are seeing these increases. Macalester College, a private liberal arts school in St. Paul, Minnesota, reported that 29% of students in 2024 had a disability, up from 5% a decade ago. Shama Bermudez, head of the Center for Disability Resources at Macalester, said the needs that students are reporting now are more complicated and in the past years. You used to see students with a singular diagnosis, ADHD or something physical, Mr. Bermudez said. Now we're seeing a lot more students where there may be ADHD and mental health and a learning disability and anxiety or depression, so it's become much more complex. But he added schools should be doing what they can to invest in what the students need on campus. Sydney Bellarouche, 20, a student at Ursinus College in Pennsylvania, where the percentage of disability designations has climbed to 36% from 12% in the past decade, said he struggled a bit before receiving disability accommodations, such as a quiet testing room. The smallest distractions that may not affect another person can really trip me up, sensory-wise, he said. Let's say someone's constantly clicking a pen. I'll pick up on that. Going in to a distraction-reduced room that eliminates certain obstacles for me when it comes to taking these tests. His grade point average, he said, was 3.971. Mr. Bellarouche added that while it was possible some people receive accommodations they don't really need, if one person's doing that and there are 6 who aren't, who are going to stop? Cole Cochran, a Harvard junior, said he wouldn't be surprised if the intense pressure on campus meant some people look to help themselves by seeking accommodations. If there is anyone gaming the system, it's a product of stress and desperation, he said. But adding more restrictions on accommodations could hurt people who really need them, he said. A possible alternative? Realizing it's okay to have less than a 4.0 at one of the world's top universities. Pranav Madhya, a Harvard senior, said disability accommodations have been a topic of conversation on campus chat apps recently, but he can see how he's harmed if someone else gets a little extra time to complete a test. I don't think it's a big problem, he said. The disability figures reported by colleges to the government do not break down the nature of disabilities among students' body. Several school officials said they generally cover a mix mental and physical disabilities, including temporary conditions such as for broken bones or students who may be sensitive to light after a concussion. Some reported disabilities are not related to academics, but might call for housing or classroom accommodations, such as for a student using a wheelchair or on crutches. Schools may also provide dining hall accommodations for those with certain food allergies. Accommodations could be offered for students who need to leave class periodically to check their blood sugar, or who have sometimes late or unable to attend class because of flare-ups of other medical conditions. Certain medical diagnoses have also been on the rise among young people in recent years, including autoimmune disease and eating disorders. To apply, students submit documentation from a medical professional and discuss possible accommodations with school staff. Harvard recently established a centralized testing facility for students requiring accommodations during exams so that professors do not have to scramble to find rooms for students who need them, and students, said Stephen Pickner, a Harvard professor of psychology. Dr. Pickner added that as more people cite disabilities, the label is being stretched into meaninglessness. Everyone benefits from more time and fewer distractions, though to varying degrees along continuum, Dr. Pinker said by email, adding, An exception may be by some students with a form of autism that makes them unusually sensitive to peripheral sound or motion. Keith Altman, a lawyer who leads a firm specializing in education matters, said he has done thousands of consultations related to students with disabilities. I don't think people are trying to game the system, he said, but I do think there are people who may not need accommodations at all times. These people would rather register and not necessarily need it than need it and not be able to get it for half a semester. Trevor Kalb, a Vanderbilt University pre-med student, said he was diagnosed with ADHD and autism as a child. He sometimes gets distracted or thinks out loud during tests. Sometimes I do use it to help visualize when going through a problem. And obviously, you can't do that during an actual test, Mr. Kalb said. Throughout the education, Mr. Kalb has been approved for accommodations from his schools, which he said help keep him on track. That has continued at Vanderbilt, where the percentage of students with disabilities is 15% up from 8. On test days, for example, he is permitted to take his test separately from his classmates in a monitored, private, or semi-private room where there are fewer distractions, and his self-talking won't bother anyone or give away answers. It definitely helps me, he said. My next article is Retiring Move, Baby Boomers Pick New York by Winnie Hugh. Bob Krinsky roused his much younger neighbors for a 3-mile run in howling winds along the quay and icy Brooklyn waterfront. Afterwards, as they thawed out, he called their running club together in a circle. Okay, everybody hands in, he said, as they stacked their hands in the center. This was awesome. At 65, he's the club's designated CVO, Chief Vibes Officer. It's keeping up with Bob, said Alexa Brewster, 29. I wish I was joking, honestly. Mr. Krinsky relocated last year from San Francisco to Williamsburg, a formal industrial neighborhood in Brooklyn, to be closer to his 2 grown sons after his 30-year marriage ended. He is starting over in a 2-bedroom apartment with sweeping 47th floor views of the Manhattan skyline, paying almost $11,000 a month to rent. I'm a 35-year-old man trapped in a 65-year-old body, he said. I thrive on the energy here, and I think my youthful vibe contributes to it and is nourished by it. Mr. Krinsky is among a growing number of older people making the move to New York City, undeterred by the high prices, tight living spaces, and logistical challenges of getting around crowded sidewalks, especially for those with bad knees. In 2023, an estimated 15,705 people aged 65 and up moved to New York City, a 40% increase from 2019, according to an analysis of census data by John Mollenkopf, a professor of political science and sociology at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. These older New York transplants have often followed their children to the city and may help out with grandchildren. Others come for better medical care or the convenience of not having a car, or for museums, shows, and restaurants they cannot get anywhere else. Some are new to the city while others have returned after decades away. There are a lot of older adults who don't want to be cooped up in a retirement home, said Jonathan Bowles, the executive director for the Center for an Urban Future, a Manhattan think tank that studies older adult issues. For them, New York is a great antidote. It's a place they can really live a second life. Many are baby boomers, the enormous post-World War II generation that has long shaped America's economic, social, and cultural life. Now the boomers are redefining what it means to grow older. As a teenager, Susie Curley had dreamed of living in New York. After her husband had died in 2023, she decided to join her son in Manhattan. A family friend introduced her to Mark Jovanik, a broker at the real estate firm Compass, who helped her buy a $1.5 million 1-bedroom apartment from Greenwich Village. To pay for it, she sold her house in more than 40 years from Fort Worth, Texas, along with a weekend place nearby in Bluffdale. Ms. Curley, 79, now shops at the Union Square Green Market and rides the subway almost everywhere. She takes drop-in ballet classes in the Broadway Dance Center in Midtown and film art classes at New York University. She has gone to museums, plays, operas, and even a taping of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Almost every day, out on the sidewalk, I say out loud to myself, I cannot believe that I get to live here, she said. Dream house or city life? Most older New Yorkers have simply aged in place, pushing the city's 65 and up population to 1.43 million in 2023 to 1.28 million in 2019. Mr. Molenkoff's analysis found. Those just arriving, like Miss Curley, are still outnumbered by those leaving. An estimated 22,355 older residents left the city in 2023, with many heading to warmer and cheaper retirement destinations. But Boca Raton or Phoenix won't do for some late-in-life New Yorkers. Melissa Leifer, a broker at Keller Williams, New York City, said that the older buyers now accounted for about 40% of her apartment sales, compared with about 15% a decade ago. River Spring Living, a nonprofit senior community, has also received a growing number of out-of-state inquiries for its 32-acre campus in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. The older newcomers often have money from selling larger houses in the suburbs or from substantial nest eggs after decades of working and saving, according to real estate brokers and developers. In Brooklyn, Amy and Dr. Paul Silverman are on their second retirement. In 2012, they built a retirement house in Asheville, North Carolina, with the porch overlooking the mountains, a fire pit, beehives for fresh honey, and apple and pear trees. That was the planned last stop, said Dr. Silverman, 74, a retired oncologic radiologist and ceramic artist. But Miss Silverman, 73, who has macular degeneration, eventually had to stop driving and grew frustrated at being stuck at home. The quality of their local health care declined, and some of their friends moved away to closer to their families or live in retirement communities. The Silvermans sold their house in 2024 and used the proceeds along with some of their savings to buy a $2.3 million two-bedroom apartment in Boerum Hill that is just 2,200 steps from their son's family. Now, Miss Silverman walks their Australian Labradoodle, Poppy, around the neighborhood, takes the subway by herself, and volunteers as an English language tutor. Dr. Silverman is an elevator ride away from the ceramic studio in their building. A lot of people our age have saved, Dr. Silverman said. Now, if you can do it, instead of going on a cruise or something like that, why not invest in a lifestyle that's going to pay you back every day, every hour, by having a world-class city at your fingertips? Still, New York prices have been an adjustment. The Silvermans ordered delivery once and never again, after paying $100 for Indian food for two. For others, including retirees scraping by on fixed incomes, moving to New York is not even an option because it is too expensive. As the city grapples with an affordability crisis, the number of older residents living in poverty has increased to nearly 1 in 5 people, according to the Center for an Urban Future. Out with millennials, many older transplants left behind their families and friend groups and found themselves strangers in a new city. But some said that they have been pleasantly surprised by how friendly New Yorkers could be. After Ms. Curley's white terrier mix, Blanche, became sick and had to be euthanized in December, her neighbors sent her cards and letters and invited her over for dinner. One woman gave her a box of treats from La Maison du Chocolat and a copy of the book New York Sketches by E.B. White, with a bookmark placed by the obituary he wrote for his family's dog, Daisy. The Silvermans have hosted Sunday brunch with coffee cakes, scones, and fruit salad for their neighbors, many of whom are in their 30s or 40s, and gone out with them for drinks and birthday parties. When a neighbor had a new sofa delivered one day, Dr. Silverman went and jumped on it to see if it was comfortable. The neighbor was on call with a coworker who asked, "What is this? Like friends?" "We just offer a different perspective," said Miss Silverman. "I'm not preaching to them because they're not my kids, but we've lived a lot longer. I think that's part of it." Mr. Krinsky, who runs a healthcare strategy consulting firm, knew only his sons, Harry Krinsky, 31, and Leo Krinsky, 26, when he moved to Brooklyn. To reach his goal of creating communities for himself, he signed up for softball, basketball, and beach volleyball leagues through the Volo Sports app. He also joined 2 running clubs and 2 improv courses with the Second City. Mr. Krinsky calls himself the elder statesman, and as sea of people in their 20s and 30s, he has given job advice to his neighbor, Miss Brewster. When another neighbor, Bruna Fabregat, 35, was sick, he left a pint of chicken soup outside for her door. For Mr. Krinsky's birthday, his neighbors recorded personal birthday wishes and thanked him for inspiring them in a video. It's a gift to be able to get his perspective on life, people, careers, Miss Brewster said. We feel very lucky to have Bob in our group. Leo Krinsky, who lives in Williamsburg, said he was surprised when his father moved 4 blocks away. He jokingly told his father that he was not allowed to go to the same bars. I was like, oh man, that might be a little too close for comfort, he recalled. But it all worked out. Mr. Krinsky sees both his sons every week or 2 to have dinner, hit the gym, or watch a basketball game. He has even been invited to their birthday parties. His older son stayed with him when he was in between apartments. Mr. Krinsky said he had no regrets about becoming a New Yorker. I think I have lived the best years of my life this last year, and I'm very energized, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Service. Mexico reveals World Cup safety plan by James Wagner and David Shortell. Mexican authorities on Friday announced a plan to deploy 100,000 security forces this summer in a bid to stabilize the country and safeguard this year's World Cup tournament after the killing of a top cartel leader. The sweeping mobilization is a direct response to a surge in nationwide cartel violence that erupted nearly 2 weeks ago in retaliation for the drug kingpin's death, fueling skepticism over whether Mexico can protect the millions of fans expected to attend the world's largest sporting event. General Roman Villavazzo, the Mexican military leader who will oversee the country's World Cup security operations, outlined the safety plans during a news conference on Friday morning. In all, the Mexican government said it would rely on 100,000 security force members, drawing ranks from the military, members of Mexico's security ministry, and private security firms. The forces will be heavily concentrated in the 3 host cities, Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey, and be supplemented by roughly 200 police bomb-sniffing dogs. The government will also deploy more than 2,100 military vehicles, 24 aircraft, and 33 drones, General Villavazzo said. He added that Mexican officials would set up security perimeters around points of interest in places like Guadalajara, including the airport and stadium. As you can see, we are very prepared for the World Cup, President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico said at the news conference. Guadalajara, the capital of Jalisco State, is the stronghold of Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the group once led by Ruben Oseguero Cervantes, the drug lord known as El Mencho, who was killed in Mexico military operations on February 26. After his death, armed groups unleashed a wave of violence in 20 of Mexico's 32 states, attacking security forces, blocking highways, and setting fire to businesses and vehicles. At least 62 people in total were killed. Since then, some tourists and national soccer teams slated to play in Mexico have expressed concern about traveling to the country. The World Cup represents an unprecedented event, General Villavazzo said, which will require the Mexican government to confront any national security threat and show a reliable, secure, and organized Mexico. Mexican security forces began specialized training in January, he said, and they plan to carry out exercises later this month. The World Cup will jointly be hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Mexico will hold 13 World Cup games, 5 in Mexico City, the capital, 4 each in Monterrey and Guadalajara. The country will be the first to host the World Cup 3 times. The 5-week tournament will begin June 11th when the Mexican national team plays against South Africa in Mexico City. But before then, 4 qualifying matches will be held later this month in Monterrey and Guadalajara. Mexican and FIFA officials have sought to protect calm and insisted the World Cup in Mexico wasn't in jeopardy. FIFA did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Friday, but after Mr. Oseguera's killing, the head of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, said his organization had total confidence in Mexico and Ms. Sheinbaum's government. On Wednesday, Mexican officials from the federal government and the 3 host sites met with FIFA representatives to coordinate security plans. Mexico, which is already in the top 10 of most visited countries in the world, received nearly 50 million international tourists last year. Officials say they expect nearly 5.5 million visitors for the World Cup. As a result, Mexican officials have mounted publicity campaigns to promote safety and dispel disinformation. The tourism offices in the states of Guerrero, Jalisco, and Quintana Roo, the last home beach destinations like Cancun, Playa del Carmen, or Tulum, have been posting video testimonies from tourists saying how safe they felt in the days after Mr. Oseguera's killing. The next article is Surfers Seek Lost Wave in City Far from the Sea, Trying to Restore It in Downtown Munich by Christopher Scheutz. Ignoring the winter freeze seeping down from the Alps, 2 men shed their parkas one recent morning, squirmed into wetsuits, and walked into a raging creek in downtown Munich. A helper handed them a 20-foot metal bar, which the men shoved underwater. They were trying to create a wave by installing an obstacle that would bend the churning water to surfable perfection, and they were failing. Munich, despite sitting some 200 miles from the nearest sea, was an unlikely surf spot until recently. Enthusiasts flocked to the waterway called the Eisbach in a park near a university neighborhood to take turns riding the artificial wave. But after the authorities dredged the channel last year, the wave vanished. Now the Munich surfing community, yes, there is such a thing, is trying to remake it. Nature and bureaucracy have complicated things. The city authorities have urged caution after a death at the creek last year. They want the surfers to install what they see as a safer kind of wave maker, one that is fixed into the creek bed, unlike the old version, which was hung from a bridge. The problem is that surfers' efforts to satisfy the demand have not been yet made. When the men in wetsuits jammed the metal bar into the creek bed, the icebox current kept dislodging it. Tao Schirmacher, 43, an industrial engineer and the informal leader of the wave resuscitation team, said it's so ridiculous. We could have the wave back in 15 minutes, but we have to go through all this hassle to prove the city that we can do it safely. For more than 3 decades, the Eisbach wave was a beloved Munich attraction, drawing tens of thousands of visitors a year and spawning intimidators in Munich and elsewhere in Europe. Patrick Ritchie, 63, of Bondi Beach, Australia, a more traditional surfing capital, was visiting the Eisbach during a vacation. We're fascinated by this, he said. How can you surf in this cold? How can you surf on such a small wave? Originally, the wave appeared only occasionally near a century-old bridge in the south of the park, the English Garden. In the early 1990s, a surfer named Walter Strasser tried to engineer a way to summon it on command. Mr. Strasser said in an interview that he had spent about 300 hours testing different setups in the water before finding a simple, reliable solution. He lowered a long metal board using ropes and chains from the bridge into the water. Once in place, the ramp pushed the rushing currents upward to create a steady wave. Without the ramp, Munich loses a piece of its soul, Mr. Strassmer, now 67, said in a telephone interview. Installing a wooden board costs about $1,200, said Mr. Schirmacher, who financed replacements on several occasions. He compares the outlay to the cost of a ski pass. Over time, long lines formed on the banks, especially during summer. Surfers would wait to jump on the wave and stay on top for as long as possible before being thrown off, drifting downstream, and rejoining the line, a cross between surfing and riding a mechanical bull. Spectators would rather gather on the bridge to watch. Riding the wave became so popular that dedicated surfers lamented the long wait. Some brought floodlights to surf at night. Others implored a nearby surf store not to rent boards. The city, which profited from the visitors, long tolerated the surfers and the ramp, even installing life rings and a list of rules at the water's edge. Last spring, however, a surfer drowned after her safety line caught on an obstacle underwater. The city investigated, even diverting the water for some days, but could not discover the exact cause. Surfers said that the artificial ramp was not in place at the time, and the sediment on the creek bed had created the wave that day. The city has never blamed the ramp for the death. In October, with investigations complete, city workers cleaned the channel, but the wave disappeared, leaving only churning water. The city refuses to let surfers install a fresh ramp, citing safety concerns and legal liability. The mayor of Munich, Dieter Reiter, said that he wanted the surf back, but that it had to be done safely. You wouldn't believe how important this wave is to Munich, because it's an expression of an entire lifestyle, he said in an interview. Surfers said they are increasingly frustrated. Some revived the wave with an unapproved ramp over Christmas, but the authorities stopped them, threatening fines. The metal bar test was overseen by Robert Myers-Stout, who, besides being an avid surfer, is a professional mechanical engineer. After about an hour trying to keep the bar underwater, Mr. Myers-Stout and the crew gave up. They briefly lowered a strip of wood into the water, temporarily recreating the unauthorized ramp technique. A wave immediately appeared. As an engineer, Mr. Myers-Stout said, "It is frustrating to see that there is a very simple solution, but that it is simply not welcomed." The next article, Europe isn't joining U.S. war with Iran, but it can't escape the fallout. Diplomatic Angst Across Continent by Mark Landler. A week into American-Israeli military campaign against Iran, Europe's leaders remain united in their misgivings about an operation they never asked for. But the reality is they are being dragged into it more by the day, and that is causing political and diplomatic headaches from London to Berlin. The tensions are visible in the growing gap between the words of European leaders and the orders they are giving their military commanders to send warships, planes, and other combat equipment into the Middle East. "We are not at war," President Emmanuel Macron of France said on his social media Thursday. "We don't want to go to war." Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy told broadcasters the same day, "We are not joining the U.S. in Israeli offensive strikes." Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain said in Parliament on Monday, "Europe is caught in deepening dilemma. On the one hand, its leaders need to protect their citizens stranded in the region, honor defense pacts with Arab states, and in some cases allow the United States to use their military bases to avoid antagonizing President Trump. On the other, they need to avert a show of support for American actions, to avert a military backlash from Iran, as well as electoral consequences from their restive publics, which are anxious to avoid the quagmire of another Middle East war." Mr. Macron, for example, was responding to a young woman on Instagram who pleaded with him to steer clear of the war so she could live in peace. "I understand your concern," he said, "but I want to be very clear. You are not going to war at all." Yet France scrambled Rafale fighter jets over the United Arab Emirates after a drone attack hit a French naval base in Abu Dhabi. Mr. Macron has ordered the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle to the eastern Mediterranean Sea, where it could take part in a French-led effort to open strategic shipping lanes. In Italy, Ms. Meloni agreed to deploy air defense forces to Persian Gulf countries to defend them from Iranian missiles and drones. Italy has also allowed American planes to use its bases, though Ms. Meloni emphasized that it was for logistical support, not offensive operations. Even that limited support has put Ms. Meloni in a tricky position with Italian voters. Mr. Trump, with whom she had carefully cultivated a relationship, is deeply unpopular in Italy. Her salacious approach could now threaten her government, which faces a referendum on judicial reform later this month that it could lose. The episode has also sowed doubts about how good the relationship between Ms. Meloni and Mr. Trump really is. He did not give Italy a heads up about the attack, and there is little evidence Ms. Meloni has had any influence over him since then. In Britain, Mr. Starmer is weathering criticism from allies who worry that he is leaning too far in the direction of supporting the operation and jibes from Mr. Trump, who said that the Prime Minister was no Winston Churchill, after Britain refused to let the United States use its bases for the initial assault on Iran. The chill has not lifted even after Mr. Starmer dispatched Typhoon jet ships and counter-drone systems. It fell to the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, to sum up Europe's predicament after he sat next to Mr. Trump in the Oval Office on Tuesday, listening to the president's bullish briefing on the military campaign. We don't know if the plan will work and whether the military strikes from abroad will enable political change from within, Mr. Merz said. This plan is not without risk, and we would have consequences. Despite expressing those doubts, Mr. Merz has faced a backlash at home, partly because he offered no defense when Mr. Trump criticized Mr. Starmer and Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of Spain, both of whom had denied U.S. planes access to their country's bases. Mr. Merz said later that he stuck up for them over lunch with Mr. Trump. For Europe's leaders, there is no perfect way to thread the needle between assuaging Mr. Trump and limiting domestic outcry. A week into the war, Britain has now quietly provided the United States with significant military support. But that has failed to insulate Mr. Starmer from Mr. Trump, perhaps because the Prime Minister, likely wary of criticism at home, has not matched the private support with public endorsement. We've done far more than the Germans, though Merz got a shout-out in the Oval Office, said Pete Ricketts, a former British National Security Advisor. These leaders are all walking a tightrope, and the tightrope is even higher for Starmer. Mr. Ricketts said Europe's leaders needed to be realistic about their ability to alter the trajectory of the war. Mr. Trump did not consult them about it beforehand, and in any event, he has not been consistent about its goals. Mr. Ricketts said the president was more likely to be guided by factors like oil prices and the financial markets and the sentiment within his own political base. Sidelined in the main theater of combat, some countries are focusing on where they have particular interests. France has tried to keep Lebanon, a former French protectorate, from being drawn further into the war since the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah fired rockets from there into Israel, drawing a furious Israeli retaliation. On Thursday, France said it would supply Lebanese armed forces with armored transport vehicles to help combat Hezbollah. Mr. Macron raised the issue of Lebanon in a phone call with Mr. Trump and pushed for a truce in calls with regional leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. Everything must be done to prevent this country, which is close to France, from being dragged into this once again war, Mr. Macron said on his social media. France's influence over Israel, analysts said, is hardly greater than over the United States, but they said that they should not stop Mr. Macron and other European leaders from voicing their views about the direction of the military campaign, even if that causes tension with Mr. Trump. They need to do that because they're elected politicians, said Mark Leonard, director of European Council of Foreign Relations, a research group based in London. Pretending that you have no control over things is not something that will go over well with the European public. They're already restive and frustrated. While European leaders had little voice at the beginning of the war, analysts said they may feel more emboldened as it goes on. That is because Europe would be more directly affected than the United States by the fallout from a splintered Iran. If you had real collapse, fragmentation, refugee flows from Iran, that would have a huge impact on Europe, said Thomas Wright, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, who is senior director for strategic planning at the new National Security Council during the Biden administration. Will they engage with the administration to heighten Trump's awareness of the scenario and to avoid it? You are listening to readings of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article, fewer pregnant women received acetaminophen in ERs after warning, by Azeen Garashi. Acetaminophen prescriptions for pregnant women declined in emergency rooms across the country after a White House briefing in September, during which President Trump claimed that the painkiller could cause autism, researchers reported on Thursday. The new peer-reviewed analysis, published as a research letter in the British medical journal, The Lancet, looked at nearly 90,000 emergency room visits by pregnant women over an 11-week period after the White House briefing. The study found that prescriptions for acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol, dropped by 10% before eventually seeming to recover. By comparison, the researchers observed no change in acetaminophen prescriptions for more than 850,000 women who were not pregnant and arrived at emergency rooms during the same period. Medical groups, including the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, have defended acetaminophen and the recommended doses as the safest option to treat fever in pregnant women. Untreated fevers themselves are linked to an increased risk of neurological disorders in babies. During the unusual White House briefing, the president, flanked by health agency leaders, urged pregnant women to avoid the painkiller, claiming that it could cause autism in children. Don't take Tylenol. Don't take it. Fight like hell not to take it, Mr. Trump said. That claim is not supported by the data. While scientists have conducted research on potential connection between acetaminophen and autism for years, the studies have so far yielded inconclusive results. The largest studies using data from Scandinavian countries that have tried to account for genetic factors have shown no link. Andrew Nixon, a spokesman for the Department of Health and Human Services, said that the administration's message was another example of its commitment to telling the truth about public health. The new research showed that the decrease resulted in 22.5 fewer acetaminophen orders per 1,000 emergency room visits by pregnant women. The researchers did not find an increase in prescriptions to riskier pain-relieving alternatives. Prescriptions of acetaminophen to pregnant women returned to the levels from earlier that summer by the end of the study period in December. But the number of prescriptions might have still been lower than it would have been otherwise, since acetaminophen typically goes up during the cold and flu season, said Dr. Jeremy Faust, an emergency room physician at Brigham and Women's Children and co-author of the new study. More data was needed to better understand the full scope of the changes, he added. Dr. Faust writes a widely read newsletter that has been critical of the Trump administration and federal health officials. Even if the dip in prescriptions was temporary, the study showed the substantial impact of public announcements in the short term, said Dr. Aaron Kesselheim, professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, who is not involved within the study. Even if it's the case that people move on and the news cycle spins onward and people forget, those short-term spikes and dips represent many, many people, Dr. Kesselheim said. He also cautioned that the snapshot was incomplete because many people take acetaminophen at home, a use that is much harder to measure. Prescriptions account for only a small fraction of the acetaminophen taken in the United States. Most of the time, people buy the drug over the counter and take it without a doctor's supervision. It's not clear how much this declines in prescribing that occurred immediately after the news briefing were driven by women refusing acetaminophen, or for doctors choosing not to order it. 10% is not a huge change, but you wouldn't want any patients who are at risk for preeclampsia or febrile illness to go without treatment, said Dr. Nathaniel DiNicola, the advisor to the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists on environmental issues. The new study matched his own experience as an obstetrician encountering a wave of anxious patients in the immediately weeks after the White House briefing. The concerns quickly died down, he said. Patients were very willing to receive their doctor's advice, and our advice never really changed. We used Tylenol as needed, and the lowest amount and for the shortest duration, said Dr. Nicola. Dr. DiNicola also noted that the new study showed that the acetaminophen was prescribed judiciously to pregnant women in the first place. Fewer than a quarter of pregnant women presenting to the emergency room were prescribed the painkiller even before the White House announcement. The new study also analyzed outpatient prescriptions data for Levacron, a B vitamin-based drug long used to treat symptoms of chemotherapy. Dr. Marty Makary, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, announced at the brief news conference that Levacron was used for a treatment for autism. The move flipped the script for the drug approval process. Typically, a pharmaceutical company carefully studies a drug and then submits the data as part of a formal application for drug approval. For Levacron, the agency said it reviewed the relevant research and made the decision to recommend the drug on its own. The Lancet study also analyzed prescription data from more than 8 million doctors' visits for children aged 5 to 17 years old, showing that outpatient prescriptions for Levacron increased by 71% during the 11-week study period. Though the absolute numbers are still small, representing an increase in roughly 17 prescriptions per 100,000 children, the immediate impact of the announcement was undeniable, said Dr. Aubrey Brombach, a pediatric neurologist at the University of Texas in Austin. I had a few weeks where every single patient was asking about it, said Dr. Brombach. Small studies, including that was recently retracted, have suggested that the drug can improve communication skills in children with a condition called cerebral folate deficiency, in which low levels of folate in spinal fluid can lead to deficiencies in motor and language skill development. But that condition is rare. When trying to help families with their questions about Levacron, Dr. Brombach has insisted offering to do genetic testing to do better understanding what might have contributed to their altered brain development. But the FDA decision in September has put pressure on physicians to prescribe the drug. The announcement put on Levacron on families' radar, so they started asking for it, Dr. Brombach said. As long as families are requesting it, clinicians will continue to prescribe. Next article is a report on health of nature is issued independently by Katrine Einhorn. Scientists and other experts were preparing a first-of-its-kind assessment of the health of nature in the President of the United States, Trump, returned to the White House. He canceled the report. The researchers went ahead and compiled it on their own. Last week, they released an 868-page draft for public comment and scientific review. Many of the preliminary findings are grim. Freshwater ecosystems across the country are in crisis, overdrawn, polluted, fragmented, and invaded. Marine and terrestrial ecosystems are degraded, with reduced biodiversity. An estimated 34% of plant species and 40% of animal species are at risk of extinction. Human pressures on nature are eroding the necessities it gives us, such as clean water, food, health, livelihood, and protection from storms and fire. But there is hope, and the authors emphasize the ability to chart a new course. The future is not fixed, said Philip Levine, who directed the assessment both under the government and since. Conservation, restoration, and renewed connections between people and nature can improve ecosystem health and strengthen community resilience. The report's name has changed from the National Nature Assessment to the Nature Record to reflect that it is a new independent effort, but it builds off work that was already underway, and most of the authors remain the same. Its scientific review will be conducted by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, the same organization that would have reviewed the report had it remained under the federal government. The first two chapters that will summarize the sprawling endeavors or not yet written, because the authors are waiting until this round of feedback, but 13 other chapters are in place. The report explores not only actions that harm nature, but also how people are affected by nature and its loss, with chapters on human health, the economy, and national security. And throughout the report highlights solutions and nature's ability to recover when given the chance. The initial effort began in earnest on Earth Day in 2022, when President Joseph Biden Jr. signed an executive order calling for an assessment of the condition of nature in the United States. In January 2025, with the authors weeks away from submitting a first full draft, the Trump administration disbanded the effort. But Dr. Levine, who left his government role with the change of administration, continued the work alongside about 125 researchers who are not federal employees. The first thing we had to do was get funding, Dr. Levine said. Virtually all of the authors were already volunteering their time, but the group needed to rehire administrative staff, secure technical support, and pay for the review by the national academies. The group raised more than $3 million, mostly from foundations, Dr. Levine said. It just reaffirmed in a really visceral way the importance of the work he had added. All along, the assessment's charge was to synthesize existing research, and so its individual findings are not new. Rather, it is intended to provide a scientific consensus by which policymakers and the public can make informed decisions. Having a clear picture of where nature is, what its condition and trajectory is going to help people manage their relationship with nature, said Kyle McKay, a civil engineer who served on the report's original steering committee as a liaison to the Department of Defense. After the assessment moved to the private sector, so did Mr. McKay, and he continued to work on it. The White House did not respond directly to questions about the assessment or say whether the administration would read and comment on it, but Kush Desai, a spokesperson, wrote in an email the Trump administration's efforts to slash taxpayer funding of waste, fraud, and abuse and grant spending, including for ideological pet projects, are only strengthening what's driven Americans' dominance in research and development. Themes of equity and environmental justice, which were valued by Mr. Biden but derided by Mr. Trump. In addition to canceling the Nature report, the Trump administration took aim at national climate assessments, which are mandated by Congress and have been published since 2000. It diminished the authors and released a separate report from the Energy Department that downplayed the threat of climate change. Scientists condemned the report, and in January, a judge ruled that the way the government commissioned it had violated the law. Katherine Hayhoe, an author of On National Climate Assessments under Republican and Democratic administrations and chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy, was not formally involved with the Nature record but acted as an occasional advisor. She praised its rigor and innovation. I absolutely love the chapter number 4, its bright spots in nature, she said, leading with the bright spots before getting to all of the doom and gloom. Actually helps to inoculate readers against the, oh my gosh, it's all over, we might as well just give up mentality that might come if you just immediately plunged into the challenges that confront us. The report is open for public comment until May 30th. The final version is slated for publication in late fall. My next article is Gasoline Prices Surge in U.S., Rising 14% in a Week, by Emmett Lindner. The price of gas in the United States reached an average of $3.41 per gallon on Saturday, a day after crude oil prices soared to levels not seen since 2023, as the spillover from the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran continued. That gain means gasoline has jumped 14% in the past week, according to data from AAA. The prices recorded Saturday were the highest for gasoline since 2024. The suddenly rising energy costs, everything from jet fuel to diesel for trucks and tractors, is more expensive and rooted in supplies of crude oil coming from the Persian Gulf. The tankers that normally carry oil out of the region are not sailing, cutting the world off from about 1/5 of its oil supply. That has led to a surge in oil prices globally. By Friday, the U.S. crude benchmark, called West Texas Intermediate, had climbed more than 35% for the week to settle at $90.90 a barrel, with much of that gain coming on Friday alone. The last time crude was trading at those levels, gasoline in the United States was above $3.80 a gallon, the data from AAA shows. There are already big variations in how much drivers pay. Though oil prices make up the largest share of the cost of gasoline, about 60%, taxes, refining margins, and distribution costs can raise prices further. Drivers in California, for example, paid on average of $5.08 a gallon on Saturday, the highest in the country, while those in Kansas paid $2.90, the lowest. Prices at the pump could steadily once oil changes and channels reopen, but the impact on American wallets could extend beyond that time. Even if it's a short-term increase in prices, in 2 to 3 months we go back to where we were. You still significantly squeezed people's budgets, and you significantly impacted the economy, said Wayne Weingarten, an economist at Pacific Research Institute, a think tank that will have long-term implications. In an interview on Thursday with Reuters, President Trump suggested that the military operation in Iran was his priority and that he was willing to tolerate a rise in prices. They'll drop very rapidly when this is over, and if they rise, they rise. But this is far more important than having gasoline prices go up a little bit, he said. Energy experts generally say presidents have little control over the price of oil, but the United States does have its Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which has a storage capacity of 714 million barrels to turn to in case of shortages. In 2022, as gas prices spiked after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, President Joseph Biden Jr. released millions of barrels from the stockpile to level out commodity prices. But if any effect is felt, it would likely be only temporary, and the reserve was not designated to be an economic cushion. If the United States is being impacted and we don't have supplies, and the military needs oil or the government, that's the purpose of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, for those types of emergency conditions, Mr. Weingarten said. If its purpose is to ameliorate market trends, it's just insufficient to that job. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 8th, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Erin. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that, at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,